I studied the 10 most powerful empires over the last 500 years and discovered they all follow the same pattern. The Dutch Empire and the guilder, the British Empire and the pound, the American Empire and the dollar, and now the rise of China. Every single one went through nearly identical cycles lasting roughly 250 years. They rise through education and innovation, dominate through trade and military power, establish their currency as the global reserve, then decline through debt, inequality, internal conflict, and the rise of a new challenger. This isn't conspiracy theory or speculation. It's a measurable pattern backed by data across 8 key metrics: education, technology, competitiveness, economic output, share of world trade, military strength, financial center power, and reserve currency status. Right now, we're watching this cycle play out in real time as the US shows clear signs of post-peak decline, while China follows the exact same rise trajectory that America, Britain, and the Dutch followed before. Understanding this pattern is crucial because it reveals where we are, where we're headed, and what comes next. The pattern is so consistent, it's actually shocking once you see it. Every empire starts the same way. After a major conflict, often a war, a new power emerges as the clear winner. They establish a new world order, new rules, new institutions, because they're so dominant. Nobody challenges them. This creates a period of peace and prosperity. People get used to the good times. They start assuming it'll last forever. They borrow money, betting on continued prosperity. This creates financial bubbles. The empire's currency becomes the reserve currency because everyone's doing business with them. This gives them enormous power to print money that others want to hold, but it also plants the seeds of decline. As prosperity grows, it gets distributed unevenly. The rich get richer, the poor fall behind, the wealth gap grows. Eventually, the financial bubble bursts. The government prints money to try to fix it. This increases internal conflict between rich and poor. Sometimes, this leads to revolution or civil war. While the empire is dealing with internal problems, a rival power rises. They've been investing in education, building their economy, strengthening their military. Eventually, they're strong enough to challenge the dominant power. This leads to external conflicts, trade wars, technology competition, potentially actual war. Eventually, one side wins, or they reach a new arrangement, a new world order is established, and the cycle starts again. This has happened over and over throughout history. Let me walk you through the specifics, starting with the Dutch. In the 1600s, the Dutch were the dominant global power. Amsterdam was the financial center of the world. Dutch ships controlled the seas. They invented the modern stock market, the joint stock company, sophisticated financial instruments. The guilder became the world's reserve currency. International trade was conducted in guilders. Countries held guilders in reserves. This gave the Dutch enormous advantages. They could print money that others wanted. They got rich, really rich. But success made them complacent. They started borrowing heavily. They had the tulip bubble in the 1630s, where tulip prices went absolutely insane before crashing. Does this sound familiar? They also faced growing competition from Britain, who was investing in their navy and building their empire. The Dutch and British fought several wars. The Dutch eventually lost. By the early 1700s, Britain was rising and the Dutch were declining. The guilder lost reserve currency status and the pound took over. The British Empire followed the exact same pattern. They invested heavily in education. They led the Industrial Revolution, innovations in manufacturing, steam power, railways. They built the world's most powerful navy, established colonies and trading posts globally. London became the world's financial center, replacing Amsterdam. The pound sterling became the reserve currency. Britain controlled a quarter of the world's land and population at peak. They were the undisputed superpower of the 1800s. But again, success planted seeds of decline. Britain's wealth gap grew massively. Factory workers lived in terrible conditions while the rich prospered. This led to social unrest and eventually reforms. Britain took on huge debts to finance the empire and fight wars. World War I broke them. The war was incredibly expensive. Britain had to borrow heavily from the United States. After the war, Britain was exhausted and deep in debt. Meanwhile, the US had become the world's largest economy and creditor. The power transition from Britain to the US happened roughly between 1900 and 1950. Notice there were two world wars during this transition. That's typical. The declining power doesn't give up easily. The United States followed the same script. After World War II, the US was the clear winner. Most of Europe and Asia were destroyed. The US economy was intact and booming. The US established the New World Order at Bretton Woods in 1944. The dollar became the world's reserve currency, replacing the pound. The US built the most powerful military, created the best universities, led in technology and innovation, dominated global trade. New York became the world's financial center. American culture spread everywhere. For about 25 years after World War II, the US was overwhelmingly dominant. This was the peak, but then the pattern repeated. The US got into expensive wars in Vietnam and elsewhere. Domestic inequality grew. Social unrest in the 1960s. The US started running trade deficits and printing money. Nixon abandoned the gold standard in 1971 because the US didn't have enough gold to back all the dollars they'd printed. The 1970s were rough with inflation and stagnation. The US recovered in the 1980s and 1990s. The tech boom, winning the Cold War, but the 2000s brought new problems. Expensive wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the 2008 financial crisis, massive money printing, growing wealth inequality, political polarization, and now a rising challenger in China. China's story is fascinating because they've been through this cycle multiple times over thousands of years. China was the world's largest economy for most of history. They invented paper money, gunpowder, printing, the compass. They had massive trade networks, but they went through repeated cycles of rise and decline. Dynasties would rise, become powerful and prosperous, then decline due to internal corruption, inequality, and external invasions. The Mongols conquered China, then the Ming Dynasty rose and built the Great Wall, then the Qing Dynasty, then decline and humiliation by European powers in the 1800s, civil war, Japanese invasion, communist revolution, but since 1980 China has been on an incredible rise, economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping, opening to trade and investment, hundreds of millions lifted out of poverty, massive infrastructure development, huge investments in education, now leading in many technologies, building a powerful military, the Belt and Road Initiative, expanding trade networks, the yuan starting to be used more in international trade, challenging the dollar. China is following the same pattern the Dutch, British, and Americans followed. So here's the critical question: where are we in the cycle right now? The US has clearly passed its peak. You can see it in almost every metric. Education is no longer the best in the world. Innovation is still strong, but facing more competition. Trade deficits running for decades. The dollar is still a reserve currency, but dominance is slowly declining. Military still strongest, but stretched thin. Wealth inequality back to 1920s levels. Political system completely dysfunctional with extreme polarization. Massive debts at every level. Government, corporate, household, and the solution every time is print more money. Meanwhile, China is rising. They're not there yet, but they're on the trajectory. Massive investments in infrastructure and technology, huge population, growing middle class, but they have problems too. Aging population, a lot of debt, political repression that might stifle innovation, potential conflicts with neighbors. The big question is, can they continue rising, or will they hit obstacles, and how will the US react? Will the transition be peaceful or violent? History suggests transitions are rarely peaceful. Let me explain why this pattern keeps repeating. It comes down to human nature and basic economics. When a country is rising, the people are hungry. They work hard, invest in the future, they're innovative, unified against threats. But success changes everything. The next generation grows up with wealth they didn't fight for. They get complacent, focus on consuming rather than producing. They borrow against the future. The elite capture more wealth and rig the system in their favor. This creates inequality and resentment. The country takes on debt to maintain living standards and fight wars to maintain dominance. Eventually, the debt becomes unsustainable. And here's the thing about reserve currencies. Having the reserve currency is an enormous advantage. You can print money and export your inflation to other countries. You can run trade deficits because others want your currency. You can borrow cheaply, but this becomes a trap. You abuse the privilege, print too much, borrow too much, run bigger deficits. Eventually, others lose confidence, start diversifying away from your currency. When that happens, the game is over. You can't just print anymore because no one wants it. You have to produce real value again, but you've lost that capacity because you've been living off financial engineering. This is where the US is right now, still dominant, still has reserve currency, but clearly past peak, facing a rising challenger. US national debt over 30. $5 trillion and growing. Government runs trillion-dollar deficits every year. Federal Reserve prints money after every crisis. Wealth inequality extreme. Political system can't agree on anything. Infrastructure crumbling, education rankings fallen, health outcomes worse than other developed countries, despite spending more, life expectancy declining. Meanwhile, China built incredible infrastructure, high-speed rail everywhere, modern cities, invested in green energy, leads in electric vehicles, dominates manufacturing, growing technology sector. Now, I'm not saying China will definitely take over or that it's better. They have serious problems too, but the pattern is clear. US declining relatively, China rising. How this plays out will define the next few decades. If history is a guide, we should expect increasing conflict. This might be economic, trade wars, currency wars, technology competition, or it could escalate to actual military conflict. The transition from British to American dominance involved 2 world wars. The question is, can we transition from American dominance to Chinese dominance, or a multipolar world without major war, or are we doomed to repeat the pattern? Let me walk through the stages in detail. Stage 1 is the new order. After major conflict, the winners establish rules. After World War II, the US created the United Nations, and IMF, World Bank, dollar as reserve currency. This is the new world order. Everyone plays by these rules because the dominant power is too strong to challenge. Stage 2 is peace and prosperity. Because there's clear dominance and everyone follows rules, there's relative peace. Trade flourishes, economy grows, people get rich. This happened in the US from 1945 to 1970. Incredible prosperity. The American dream was real. Stage 3 is the bubble. People assume prosperity will continue forever. They borrow to buy houses, stocks, whatever. Asset prices go up. Wealth effect makes people feel richer and spend more. Economy grows faster, but it's based on debt, not real productivity. In the US, this happened repeatedly. Stock bubble in the 1920s, tech bubble in the 1990s, housing bubble in the 2000s. Each time the bubble bursts, causing crisis, stage 4 is money printing and conflict. When bubble bursts, government prints money and bails out the system. This creates inflation or asset bubbles, increases inequality. Because new money goes to those with assets already, gap between rich and poor grows, leads to political conflict, in extreme cases, revolutions or civil wars. In milder cases, political polarization and dysfunction. US clearly in this stage now. Massive printing after 2008 and 2020. Extreme wealth inequality. Complete political polarization. Stage 5 is the challenge. While dominant power deals with internal conflict, a rising power emerges. This rival has been building strength, investing in future, now strong enough to challenge existing order. They demand changes to rules, build military, expand influence. US facing this from China now. Stage 6 is the conflict. Declining power doesn't want to give up dominance. Rising power wants to change rules in their favor. Leads to confrontation, economic warfare, technology competition, proxy wars, potentially direct military conflict. We're in early stages now with US-China rivalry, trade wars, tech competition. We're in early stages now with US-China rivalry, trade wars, tech competition, Taiwan situation, South China Sea disputes. Stage 7 is resolution. Eventually one side wins or they reach accommodation, new world order established with new rules, new reserve currency, new dominant power or powers, cycle starts again. So what does this mean for regular people? If you understand the pattern, you can prepare. We're likely headed for increasing conflict and instability, economic crises, political upheaval, possibly war. The dollar will likely lose reserve currency status over next few decades. This will be painful for Americans who've been living beyond means. Standard of living will decline, inflation, or major depression, or both. Politically, things will get worse before better, more polarization, extremism, potential for serious unrest. But this isn't the end of the world. Just transition from one cycle to next, America will still exist, still be a major power, but won't be the dominant power anymore. Probably move to multipolar world with several major powers. US, China, maybe India, maybe unified Europe. Eventually new dominant power emerges and cycle starts again. For individuals, the key is understand what's happening, diversify assets, don't be too concentrated in one currency or country, own real assets like property, businesses, commodities, have skills valuable in any economy, build networks and relationships, be adaptable. The big lesson from studying these cycles is nothing lasts forever. Every empire rises and falls. Every reserve currency eventually loses status. Every dominant power is eventually challenged and overtaken. This isn't pessimism, it's reality. Understanding doesn't mean you can prevent it, but you can prepare. Protect yourself and family. Even profit if you see what's coming. Key is, don't get caught in narratives people tell during bubble phase. Oh, this time is different. We're different. We learned from history. No, we're not different. Pattern repeats because human nature doesn't change. Greed, fear, ambition, desire for power. These are constants. Technology changes, names change. Underlying dynamics, same. The Dutch thought they were special. British thought empire would last forever. Americans think dollar will always be reserve currency. Chinese will probably think same when it's their turn. But cycle always continues, rise and decline, over and over. Understanding this gives perspective, helps you see through propaganda and narratives, helps make better decisions. So that's the big cycle. Empires rise and fall in predictable patterns driven by education, innovation, trade, reserve currency status, then decline driven by debt, inequality, conflict, and rise of new challenger. We're watching this in real time with US and China. It's going to be wild over next few decades. The transitions between empires are always the most dangerous periods. Lots of uncertainty, potential for conflict, but also opportunity. If you understand what's happening, the key is recognize the pattern. Don't get emotionally attached to any particular outcome. Stay flexible, protect yourself. This cycle has repeated throughout history and will continue repeating. Empires come and go, currencies rise and fall, power shifts from one center to another, but life goes on. Individuals and families who understand these patterns and prepare accordingly do better than those caught by surprise. Individuals and families who understand these patterns can prepare and navigate crises better. Watch key metrics: education, innovation, trade, debt, inequality, political stability, military power, and reserve currency status to see patterns unfold. Right now, the US is past its peak while China rises. This doesn't guarantee dominance. The world could become multipolar. Transitions are painful, especially for those used to being on top. But understanding why it happens helps you make smart decisions, where to live, invest, and what skills to develop. Knowledge of these cycles gives perspective, helping you act strategically rather than react emotionally. If this changed how you view current events, like, comment, and subscribe to navigate the chaos ahead.